38% of likely New Hampshire Democratic primary voters would vote to re-elect President Trump. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, this was actual results from a survey question. And now I got to clarify this a little bit because 38% of likely Democrat primary voters in New Hampshire would vote for President Trump's re-election if the only other alternative was a giant meteor impact to the earth that would extinguish all human life. Let's just
in other words, a Democratic presidency.
What's that?
In other words, a Democratic presidency in 2020.
So that's not really my topic. I just thought that was a funny question.
Sure.
But the actual topic is comes to us from our friends over at the Patriot Post, Thomas Gallatin, writing over the Patriot Post. And full disclosure, we and the Patriot Post have engaged in a co-promotional effort. But, one of the reasons why we're doing that is because it's a great website and we actually enjoy reading it. And so I found this story over there where he's reporting on an MSNBC interview with James Carville, who's now, believe it or not, 75 years old, former advisor and campaign guru to former President Bill Clinton. And James Carville is basically going through the list of reasons why the Democratic Party seems like we're out of our darn minds. And he's saying that if Bernie Sanders becomes the nominee of the party, it will be the end of days. And the reason for that is because Donald Trump will be reelected. Let's just take it from there. First of all,
sure.
Bill, just the idea that a guy who is well respected in the Democratic Party, or at least was within recent decades, is now saying this could be a disaster if the party nominates what is apparently the front runner right now.
We've been talking about this for the length of time we've been doing Bill Whittle now, Scotty. And that is that sooner or later, Judgment Day was going to arrive for the Democrats, and they were going to have to make a decision. Are they going to nominate a so-called centrist like Joe Biden, somebody who could retain or at least hope to retain some of the blue-collar votes that have always been historically been the foundation of the Democratic Party? Or are they going to go with the social justice crowd and pick a full-on socialist? And they can't have it both ways. And I think the reason Carville's starting to panic now is because it looks like Plan B is the one that's actually going to go into effect. Biden's, regardless of who actually won in Iowa, nobody really knows. Apparently, Buttigieg was on top with Sanders second and Warren third.
By the way, as we record this, Bill, and this is Monday evening of the week after the Iowa caucuses, the latest report is that both the Buttigieg campaign and the Sanders campaign have requested a recanvass of a number of districts or precincts or caucuses in Iowa.
The country's in the very best of hands. But I think we can agree that Buttigieg and Sanders probably turned in the best performance. And I think everybody could agree that Joe Biden, who was basically, let's prop up Joe and make him the standard bearer because he's going to bring in the traditional crop of Democrats, did shockingly badly. And at this point, they're trying to say, well, if Joe comes in fourth in New Hampshire, that's a win. So what Carville is talking about is what we've been saying for the last certainly year and a half now, if not longer, is that they're going to have to pick one of these two. And I think what's shocking Carville is that he always just assumed that it would be the Biden middle of the road kind of, traditional Democrat. And this is what you get when you let your children run wild without any discipline for years and years and years. You get them coming in and smashing up things, and you go to a trip to visit the world's largest twine ball, and you tell them no parties while you're gone, and you come back, and the house is completely trashed, and there's people passed out everywhere on the sofas, and and the carpet's been urinated on, and all the rest of it. This is what happens when you let people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez become the spokesperson for your party. You either have to deal with this early and essentially close them off and say, this is not the Democratic Party position, or you can do what they did, which is allow AOC and Sanders and Warren and all the rest to gin up this big socialism push and get an enthusiastic response from the small minority of people that think that's a good idea because they don't know anything about anything.
I want to take a couple of the things that James Carville said. And again, I'm going from this article at the Patriot Post, Thomas Gallatin's piece at the Patriot Post.
It's a great piece.
And we'll provide a link to the Patriot Post in the description below. But there are the first three things I'd like to touch on is these are Carville's comments, and I'm paraphrasing them. First of all, Democratic caucus turnout in Iowa was low, much lower than they expected. Donald Trump's popularity is high, and it seems to all of America like we Democrats can't count the votes.
All three are true.
So just at that point, his concern is that all the enthusiasm is behind the Trump reelection campaign. How do you evaluate that?
Well, all of that, and it'd be fun to get into details in just a second, but we all know that when Bill Clinton ran for president in 92, that there was a sign on the wall of campaign headquarters. And I don't know if it was Carville or Stephanopoulos who put it up. I suspect it was Carville. But the sign said, "It's the economy, stupid." And that was on the wall in campaign headquarters for Clinton in 92 because either Carville or Stephanopoulos or both or all three, including Bill, all of them, understood that when it comes down to deciding on whether or not you want to re-up with the president you've got, unless there is some remarkable personal quality about that person, and I'm talking about you, Barack Obama, people will vote their wallets. It's the economy, stupid. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? That's the question, whether it's phrased that elegantly by Ronald Reagan or not. That's the question that comes up when you're dealing with a re-election, when you have somebody who's already been in office versus somebody who hasn't been. And this economy is unbelievable. For the 8 years of Obama, I was saying that the economy is a spring that's being compressed by all of these regulations and taxes, and all of this growth that would normally happen in 8 years in America has been just tamped down by all of these high taxes and regulations that the Democrats with Obama had in place. And that once you could release that spring, it would be just a tremendous sort of a release of power. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So Carville knows that it's the economy, stupid. So he would have a very tough fight, even if he had a candidate that was worth fighting for, but he doesn't. And for him to go out into panic mode like this is telling me that he's basically saying, look, this is an interpretation, because Carville's a smart guy. He's not a particularly nice guy, but he's a smart guy. I think what Carville is basically saying to himself is, listen, we better start ringing the fire alarms now, because we're not going to beat Donald Trump in 2020. And if we go with the socialist candidate, we're not going to beat the Republicans in 2024 either. And we're never going to beat them until we understand that we have to regain our core constituency, which is working class people, which has gone solidly to Trump in 2016, cost them the election, and without question is stronger for him now.
Let me give you a couple of topics that he commented on specifically, the areas where he said not just Bernie Sanders, but a large part of the Democratic candidates for president are all in this general camp. They're talking about open borders, decriminalizing illegal immigration, ending nuclear energy, ending fracking. Bernie Sanders in particular talks about letting criminals, according to Carville, as quoted in this Patriot Post story, Sanders talks about letting criminals and terrorists vote, free tuition, and we already did an episode of our show on college loan forgiveness. All of these issues, he talks about how nobody on the stage was willing to raise their hand, I think other than Amy Klobuchar, and say, I'm not supportive of socialism. And so his summarizing this all, he says, Carville says, it's not how you become a majoritarian party. They've tacked off the damn radar screen.
He's exactly right. The Democratic Party in 2020 is, it's exit stage left. And that's where technically it's exit stage right. It's house left. Everybody sees them going off to the left. I just thought I'd throw that in and finally get a little mileage out of my theater degree.
Boy. Yes.
Thank you very much. The entire statement that Carville is making is the it's almost kind of like the wail of a person who clearly sees that the chickens have come home to roost.
He's saying
And
he's a liberal, but what he just said sounded like the critique you would hear from the Republican Party about the Democrats. He says, I'm a liberal, but these people are way off.
And this is why I feel so good about it. And look, when I say I feel good about it, I feel good about it short term to the degree that the further left the left goes, the further left the Democratic Party goes, I think the more irrelevant they become and the more unlikely they are to win. But it's good for the country to have two parties that actually love this country. And that hasn't been the case for quite a long time now. It's not good to think that what is actually happening is happening. And what is happening is simply this. I'd rather be an American than a Democrat. That was a sign at the Virginia gun rights rally. And that is, in fact, what is happening to this country. That's real good for Republicans short term and probably good for the country long term, for the people to realize that this party, since the 60s, has been the party of Gramsci and the party of socialism. It's a party that is dedicated to the destruction of America as we understand it. It's a party dedicated to what Barack Obama famously said just a few days before he won in 2008, the fundamental transformation of the United States of America. I'm feeling real good because as I look downstream to the pop culture, upstream rather, to the pop culture, what I find is that these democratic, let me rephrase that for clarity's sake, these progressive social justice values are not something that the American people want. The American people will not buy progressivism, even if you wrap it in Star Wars. So we are certainly past the peak influence of progressivism. We are certainly past the point when most reasonable people think, well, that's a kind of a good point about trans athletes or about multi-genders or about any of this nonsense. Free health care for illegal immigrants, all of this stuff. The progressivism is, and I just love the irony of you being able to say this, progressivism is not a sustainable belief system. It cannot be sustained. In order for progressivism to function, you have to have outrage. And in order to have outrage, you have to have problems. And in a country where the problems are getting better and better and better, just for no other reason than the economy is booming, record low unemployment for blacks, minorities, women, all the rest, as things get better and better and better, if your political position depends on outrage, you have to go further and further up into the stratosphere and then into the ionosphere to find something to be genuinely outraged about. And so the virtue signaling becomes a kind of a falsetto. It becomes kind of a shriek. I'm in favor of free health care for everybody. I'm in favor of free health care for criminals as well. I'm in favor of free health care for criminals and illegal immigrants. I'm in favor of free health care for people who are international terrorists. Who are we to judge what their society says is okay? I think the American people ought to pay for free health care for all of ISIS. This is how it goes. There's no end to it. There can't be an end to it because that's the dynamic that the politics is based on.
Now, the final quote I want your reaction to, again, from Thomas Gallatin's story at the Patriot Post. He says that Carville gives this sort of overall view of the Democrats as elitist and self-righteous, this kind of smug attitude. He says, we can't win the Senate by looking down at people. The Democrat Party has to drive a narrative that doesn't give off vapors that we're smarter than everyone or culturally arrogant. I know that James Carville was married, or probably still is married, to Mary Matalin, who's a key Republican consultant. Do you think he is picking up on some of Mary Matalin's ideas here, or is he a reformer from within the party saying, hey, this is not Jack Kennedy's party anymore?
Well, I'm glad you bring that up because that's actually a very interesting perspective. I've always been surprised by this. Carville and Mary Matalin have been married for a long, long time, since Bill Clinton was president or shortly thereafter, I think. And let me tell you what that says about Carville. That doesn't mean that he's becoming a conservative, but it does mean at the very least he's got to be open-minded enough to listen to what she has to say. She's not just like a conservative wife, who's a doctor or something. She's a political consultant. It's the most unlikely marriage in America. And the fact is that if you've got two people who are political animals on different sides of the political spectrum and they're married to each other, both of them have to have the ability at least to listen to what the other person person is saying and argue about it. So that tells me that Carville, while a Democrat to the bone, needless to say, a Democratic operative, a man who got Bill Clinton elected, is the kind of guy who is not living in the kind of echo chamber that many other people are. He's not blinded to the reality of what's going on. It doesn't mean he's going to be a Republican, but it does mean that he has his eyes open enough to realize what Republicans have realized and that many, many Democrats have realized, and that is that the Democratic Party has essentially, as he said, just gone off the rails. They've tacked off the radar. They've gone. They're off the screen now. They're stuck with a large degree of enthusiasm from a small number of people, for people like Bernie, and then they're stuck with a very small degree of enthusiasm for a relatively large number of people, for people like Joe Biden. And neither of those is going to win them an election. And so the question, I think, as I said, I think what Carville's really doing is, I don't want to say he's conceded 2020, although I suspect he probably has. I think what Carville is basically saying is, I think he's putting out a marker, not for his personal career, because I do think he cares deeply about this country. I just don't agree with him on that, and that's how it's supposed to be in America. But Carville's clearly not one of these "we must destroy America" progressives. He's not one of those people. He's an old school Democrat. And I think what he's doing is putting down a marker, not so that he can make more money after the election, but simply so that he can say, I told you that this was going to happen. If we don't make the Democratic Party an American party again, we're going to lose like we lost in 2016 and 2020, and we're going to lose next time too if we don't get back on the fundamental rails of offering Americans a different version of what's good for America rather than straight up communism from a bunch of unpleasant idiots like AOC and Bernie Sanders.
I think if James Carville were running somebody's presidential campaign this year, he'd have a sticker on their computer screen that said, "It's the majority, stupid." I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle, and we are grateful for the members at BillWhittle.com who've made this episode possible. As we've mentioned several times during this show, our friends over at the Patriot Post are actively engaged in producing not only some of the best commentary and news from a conservative perspective, but also some of the best memes on the internet. You'll want to check them out by clicking the link in the description below. We're also headed on a cruise, and frankly, the clock is ticking down toward the final moments when you can actually sign up for this cruise. If you'd like to see this kind of show produced live in your very presence and be able to engage in vigorous Q&A and sit over food and drinks and on a luxury ship sailing through the Caribbean on your way to the Bahamas with some of the finest people you'll ever meet. And I'm not talking about me and Bill. I'm talking about the members and friends and fans of this program. Then go and click that link in the description below and find out more about how you can book your cabin on our cruise May 15th through the 18th. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.